Hello all, I am Vallabh Ramakant, and in today's presentation we will look at the analysis of channel polarization, a theoretical motivation towards polar codes, and why they are attractive in 5G. Before we get started, this presentation will involve probability theory and concentration inequalities, information theory, and martingale random processes analysis techniques. This presentation will also not discuss the implementation of polar codes, we will only analyze how these codes work or why they work. In this presentation, I will be briefly explaining the groundbreaking work of Erdal Arikan on capacity achieving codes. The paper was titled Channel Polarization, a method of constructing capacity achieving codes for symmetric binary input memoryless channels in IEEE Transactions on Information Theory in July 2009. Before we get started, here are some definitions and notation we'll be using in the analysis. W is a transition probability map or channel. Essentially, X is a bit, either 0 or 1, coming from the set of 0, 1, which is denoted by script X. An output symbol Y is randomly chosen from the finite set script Y with probability W of Y given X. In this entire presentation, we'll only be dealing with binary input discrete memoryless channels without encoding. That is, the input to W here, which is X, is only going to be a bit 0 or 1. Y can be any discrete set. Next, we move to I of W, which is the symmetric capacity of the channel. Here, X is uniformly distributed over 0 and 1. So, I of W defined as the summation over all the output symbols and the summation over all input symbols, half of Wy given X log Wy given X divided by the probability of Y occurring. That's the average probability of Y occurring. This is the same as what Shannon defined in his paper. Note that I of W is bounded between 0 and 1. Next, we have Z of W, which is the Bhattacharya parameter. It measures the reliability of the channel. Again, Z of W is bounded between 0 and 1. And as you can see, when Z of W is 0, one of either W of Y given 0 or W of Y given 1 has to be 0, implying that the channel is perfect and I of W is equal to 1 then. Similarly, we also have when Z of W is equal to 1, I of W is equal to 0. It is nice to note this as Z of W and I of W are tied together, and whenever they are at the extreme values, that is 0 or 1, I of W is 1 minus Z of W. Moving on, we have W power n, which is the equivalent channel seen when W is used n times independently. Suppose we want to transmit a n length bit vector x power n or xn denoted as that. We have Y power n as the output and W power n is the effective channel seen by these bits. Again, definition, we have Yn, I'll read this as Yn and even this as Yn, is just the output symbol vector. Xn, x1n also be read as xn, is again the input bit vector, and x sub a super b, it's a notation for the sub vector going from x sub a to x sub b. Moving to channel polarization, we define this operation by using the channel Wy given X independently n times to artificially manufacture a new set of channels Wn(i) which are polarized. That is, their capacity here goes to either 0 or 1 asymptotically. This is a simple discrete communication system model. We have the input bit vector u, which we linearly transform or encode to get vector x, which then goes through the discrete memoryless channel and produces an output y. Now, once we perform smart manipulations here, we can alter what channel u effectively sees. Channel polarization can be visualized by breaking down the entire operation into two phases, channel combining and channel splitting. For decoding, we will look at the successive cancellation decoder. First, we look at channel combining and what is happening there. So, we will see what is the linear transformation which is done on u such that the net channel seen by each of these bits W and I are very good in capacity, or that is they go to either 0 or go to 1. So, first we have channel combining. The combined channel Wn is constructed using independent copies of W. The input to this joint channel is n bits and the output too is n bits, where n is a power of 2. It is constructed recursively by letting W1 of Y1 given U1 being equal to the single input single output channel W, and then W2 is defined as follows, which is W of 1 of Y1 given U1 XORed with U2 times W1 of Y2 given U2. You see the smart manipulation here is the XORing of the neighboring bits. So, U1 and U2 are XORed here. to get the first channel W1 of Y1 given U1 XOR U2. Then this is multiplied by W1 Y2 given U2. We again go forward and define W4 recursively using W2, the definition of W2. And again, you see here the neighboring bits are XORed. So U1 and U2 are XORed, U3 and U4 are XORed, and the even bits are sent to the next channel or the next independent copy of W2. So W4 has 4 output bits and 4 input bits. W2 has 2 input bits and 2 output bits. Similarly, Wn will have n input bits and n output bits, where n is a power of 2. The encoding procedure and this channel combining will get clearer if you look at this diagram. We first see W2, which is the equivalent channel seen by the 2-bit input vector U1, U2. When the encoder maps the first bit as U1 XOR U2, this is the first bit of the channel W, and the second bit is just U2, which is the even bit. Now moving forward, we define W4 using W2 and W2, 2 independent copies of W2. W4 is a channel which takes 4 input bits and produces 4 output bits, but the manipulations here are the neighboring bits are XORed, and then we perform a shuffle. So the XORed bits are grouped in one place, the even bits are grouped in one place, and then they are transmitted through W2. Now we can generalize this definition and see how Wn is defined. So you have the input vector U1 to Un, the neighboring bits are XORed, then we have this reverse shuffle operation which groups all the XORed bits in one half and all the even bits in the other half, and then transmits them respectively through Wn by 2 and Wn by 2. Again, Wn by 2 is recursively built as whatever was defined earlier. It is important to realize that Wn is the effective channel seen by the input vector U, and that is because of the encoding procedure. You should realize that the encoding procedure is completely linear. All we are doing are some XORs and some rearrangement. And when we pass it through the next channel, there also we are only doing some XORs and some rearrangements. The encoder can be easily described by a generator matrix, but we will skip those implementation details here and we'll only look at the analysis of this effective channel seen by U. So one thing to keep in mind here is the vector U sees the effective channel Wn. Now we move to the channel splitting operation. From Wn, we construct a collection of n single bit input channels called WnI, where I denotes the index of this channel. So I runs from 1 to n, and n is a power of 2. Now you see the definition of WnI. The transition probabilities are defined by summing Wn of Yn given Un over the input bits from I plus 1 to n, which are unknown bits. They don't come up in the arguments for this channel. It is a loose averaging kind of procedure. This diagram will give us more insight. So what we are doing here, we are taking the channel Wn and producing a set of n channels WnI, which take in only a single bit as input and produce the output vector y as the output and all the bits which came before it. Why do we do this? We define this channel because we want to estimate ui given y and all the other bits which came before it. So given y1 to yn and u1 to I minus 1, we are trying to estimate ui. We will prove that this channel WnI is polarized, that is, its capacity is either close to 1 or 0. So if we are given the output vector of the channel Wn and all the bits which came before it, if the capacity is close to 1 or 0, we can either completely discard the input or we can sure shot estimate what u of I is. In this slide, we see a clear intuition what is happening in a polar code. What channel polarization does is the net channel seen by the input vector is polarized, that is, it gets split into n channels which each bit sees. The ith input bit is effectively transmitted through WnI. Some of these channels become almost noiseless and some of these become very noisy. The fraction of channels which are perfect are used to send the message. That is, if A contains the indices for which the split channel WnI becomes noiseless, then we only send messages through these bits. We denote that by UA. Now A complement will contain all the indices for which the channel becomes very noisy. So those bits we will freeze in technical terms, and we'll fix these bits to a known value which is known at both the transmitter and receiver, and this will help us in the decoding process. It's important to know that all this happens asymptotically as n becomes very large. So we are using the channel W n times, which is very large, do some encoding, and in the process of that encoding, the channel seen by u1 to un becomes split like this, which is polarized. Now we define the decoding procedure. U hat I is equal to ui if it is a frozen bit, that is, it's known at the receiver. Otherwise, it is equal to the output of the decision function h sub I. The decision function hi takes u1 to I minus 1, the estimates of the bits which came before ui, and the received vector y, and defines it to be 0 if the transition probability with respect to the split channel, that is weni, yn and u1 to I minus 1, given that it was 0, is greater than the probability that it would be yn given u1 to I minus 1 given 1. So, this is kind of like a likelihood estimator, but we are not using the direct channel, we are using the split channel for this likelihood estimation, and the split channel does some averaging over the unknown bits. So, it is not exactly the likelihood estimator, but it has some form close to it. We will also shortly show that the average probability of error of this decoder goes to 0 for any transmission rate lesser than the capacity of the channel. So, this decoder will actually achieve very low probabilities of error as n becomes large. Finally, we will see formally how to prove that channel polarization works, or why does the polarization happen. But first we need to understand some definitions and lemmas and a simpler setting of what we have described. First we define the single step transformation. W is a channel. We take two independent copies of the channel W and produce two channels W prime and W double prime. So, if U1 comes from the input space of W and Y1 comes from the output space of W, then we have W prime Y1 comma Y2 given U1 to be described as half of summation over all U2 primes possible, W Y1 given U1 XOR or addition with U2 prime times W of Y2 given U2 prime. That's just the definition. And then we have W double prime is equal to Y1, Y2 and U1. Note that U1 is the input to W prime and U1 is an output of W double prime. Given U2 is equal to half W Y1 given U1 plus U2 times W Y2 given U2. From this definition we clearly see that W21 and W22, which we defined as a split channels here, they are a single step transform of W comma W, which were the single input and single output channels for each bit. This result can however be generalized for any W2 and 2i minus 1 and W2 and 2i. So, the previous result, the recursive relation between W2 and 2i minus 1 and W2 and 2i and Weni are shown here. You can easily see the resemblance of the transform technique which was described earlier. So, therefore, we can write W2 and 2i minus 1 and W2n of 2i as a single step transform of two independent copies of Weni. The relationship shown in these boxes can easily be shown by manipulating the summation terms we see in the definition of Weni. In the interest of time, we will be skipping this proof and we will move to the second lemma, which is channel parameters after a single step transform. So, we want to understand once WW goes through a single step transform and gives us W prime and W double prime, what happens to channel parameters like capacity. The result is I of W prime plus I of W double prime is equal to 2 of IW, and I of W double prime is greater than I of W prime. You see that the first equation gives us some kind of conservation law, that is saying if we have two channels, independent channels, the sum of the capacities is still not changed. So, I of W prime plus I of W double prime, the mean of this will still give us I of W. We look at the proof of this. We have this box here for reminding us what W prime and W double prime are defined as. Proof is very simple and uses information theory techniques. So, let U1, U2 be the inputs to the channels. We define X1 to be U1 plus U2 and X2 equal to U2. There is no manipulation on X2, it is just directly U2. We send X1, X2, which is the linear transform of the input vector U1, U2 to the channel W squared, which is two copies of W. Now, I of W prime, this is the mutual information between Y1, Y2 and U1. And then we also have I of W double prime, which is equal to I of Y1, Y2, U1 and U2. Now, using the chain rule of mutual information, we have this term becoming equal to I of U1 and U2 plus I of Y1, Y2 and U2 given U1. But since U1 and U2 are independent bits or independent inputs, we have the mutual information between them going to 0. So, I of W double prime becomes equal to I of Y1, Y2 and U2 given U1. Now if we sum both of them using the chain rule of mutual information, we can rewrite this as I of y1, y2 and u1, u2, the mutual information between these two vectors. Now since x is completely determined when u is known, we can rewrite this as I of y1, y2, x1, x2. Now we know what I of y1, y2 and x1, x2 is. It's just the capacity of the channel w squared, which is equal to 2 I of w. Therefore, we have the result I of w prime plus I of w double prime is equal to 2 of I of w, or the mean of the capacities of the channel w prime and w double prime is equal to the capacity of w. Hence, the capacity after the transformation is conserved in some sense. Proving the next inequality, we have I of w double prime is equal to I of y1, y2, u1 and u2 as shown earlier. Now we can again use the chain rule of mutual information, rewrite this as I of y2 and u2 plus some other conditional mutual information. But you know u2 is exactly x2 and I of y2 given u2 is actually I of w, and this is some positive term, so we have this inequality. Now using the first result, we also have immediately that I of w prime is less than I of w. We can already see some kind of polarization happening here. Starting from two channels w, we produced two channels w prime and w double prime. One of these has greater capacity than w and one of these has lesser capacity than w. So we are going towards a polarizing treatment. Now we see what happens to the channel parameter z of w. The results are z of w is equal to z of w squared, z of w prime is less than 2 of z of w minus z of w squared, and we have this last inequality z of w prime greater than z of w greater than z of w double prime. The last result again shows us how polarization comes into play. The z parameter of w double prime is lower than the z parameter of w, while the z parameter of w prime is greater than the z parameter of w. In the interest of time, we will only prove the first equality. The first equality just comes from a definition of w double prime. So z of w double prime is equal to summation over y1, y2, u1, w double prime y1, y2, u1 given that u2 is completely 0 times w double prime y1, y2, u1 given that the input bit is 1, which is equal to y1, y2, u1 the summation over that square root of w y1 given u1 times w y2 given 0. This comes from the definition of w double prime which we showed here. Rewrite the summation, we can split it, group the y2 terms together and the y1 and u1 terms together. So this becomes 2 of z of w. This is basically z of w parameter. So we have half times 2 z of w times z of w, which gives us z of w squared, and hence we have proved the first equality. The second equality can again be shown using some algebraic identities which we are skipping here. Third inequality can be shown by exploiting the convex nature of z of w and the Minkowski inequality, which we again skip here for the interest of time. So this is the summary till now. Using lemmas L1 and L2, we have three important results A, B and C. Result A shows us how W2 and 2i and 2i plus 1 are obtained from a recursive single step transform of W and I. B shows how the capacities of these channels are related, and C shows how the Z parameters of these channels are related. Pay careful attention to the indices of these channels. We have some kind of binary or power of 2 recursion. So we have 2i here, 2n here, n here, I here. We have 2i here, 2n here, n here, I here. So there's some form of binary recursion which is taking place. So naturally, exploiting the binary transformation of each single step transform, we can describe Wi by a tree traversal. We define a binary tree with the root node as W or W0. W is the single input, single output channel. All the nodes of this tree at depth m is Wi, where n is 2 power m. So at depth 2, we have W4 and all the indices as well. So W41, W42, W43 and W44. At depth 3, we have W8i. Now what we can do is define Wi as W B0, B1, B till Bn. So we are just denoting W81 or Wi as a bit string instead of Wi. This is completely equivalent because we see how the indexing is related. We are indexing them by some form of binary expansion. Now what we will be proving here is the capacity of W B0 to Bn, or a fraction of these in the tree, go to 1, and a fraction of these channels, their capacities go to 0. So now we move to the first theorem of channel polarization, which states that for any binary discrete memoryless channel W, the channels W and I polarize. That is for any delta greater than 0, as n is equal to a power of 2 and it goes to infinity through powers of 2, a subset of indices A of 1 to n, I belongs to A, J belongs to A complement, we have I of Wn(i) is between 1 minus delta and 1, which is very close to 1, and Wn of j is very close to 0. We also have that the size of this subset with respect to n is I of w, that is the fraction of channels which are very close to 1 are actually equal to the capacity of the channel. We will prove this using martingale techniques. So first we define a Bernoulli random process Bn, where Bn takes value 0 or 1 with equal probability half. Then W of B0 to Bn is a random process defined on the tree in the previous figure as we had shown, and W of 0 is the root node W, the true single input single output BDMC. Moreover, In, which is defined as the capacity of W B0 to Bn, and Zn, which is defined as the Z parameter of W B0 to Bn, are defined random processes. Notice that expectation of In given all the bits before Bn, that is B1 to n minus 1, this is the notation we'll be using, is equal to I of capacity of W B0 to Bn given Bn minus 1. So now since we know the bits B1 to Bn minus 1 or these bits are measurable in the space B1 to n minus 1, we now take the expectation only on the last bit Bn. Now since we know it's 0 or 1 with equal probability, we have half of I of W B0 to Bn minus 1 of 0 plus half of the capacity of W B0 to Bn minus 1 and the last bit being 1. Now using the property, we can rewrite this as, so you notice here this is W2n of 2i minus 1 and this is W2n of 2i. We can rewrite this as I of W B0 to Bn minus 1, which is essentially W of n minus 1, right? So I of n is a bounded martingale process because we got that it's martingale from here, and we know it's bounded because In has to be less than 1 or 0. And therefore all moments of In exist, and from the martingale convergence theorem we have that I infinity is well defined and is actually a defined random variable. Also it exists in L1. Now to show that they go to 1 or 0 almost surely, we look at the random processes on the Z parameter. Again we have expectation of Zn given all the b random variables before the nth b is equal to expectation of Z of B0 to Bn given all the bits till Bn minus 1. Now since all of these before Bn are known, we can write it as half of Z of B0 to Bn minus 1 0 plus half of Z of B0 to Bn minus 1 1, and which is less than Z of B0 to Bn minus 1. So we have this result and we use that over here. So we have expectation of Zn given B1 to Bn minus 1 is less than Z of n minus 1. Now this is a super martingale process and we know that Zn is bounded, so all moments of Zn exist. Now from martingale convergence we have Z infinity being a well defined random variable and is an L1 random variable. Now you can rewrite Zn as a sum of truncating terms, and this series converges in the L1 sense. We have expectation of Zn plus 1 minus Zn going to 0, that is all the tail terms, the expectation of those go to 0. This is from simple real analysis. But then Zn plus 1 is equal to Z of B0, B1, Bn and 0, the last bit, which is equal to Zn squared, which we had from the result Z of W2 and 2i equal to Z of W and I squared with probability half, because the last bit is 0 only with probability half. So this is true with probability half. Hence the expectation of Zn plus 1 minus Zn is actually greater than half of expectation of Zn square minus Zn. So we are just expanding it over the last bit here. The other probability terms are neglected, and since this is a positive random variable, we have that greater than inequality. Half of expectation of Zn square minus Zn, which is equal to half of expectation of Zn times 1 minus Zn. Now this expectation converges to 0. We have this expectation Zn times 1 minus Zn converging to 0, which implies Zn converges to either 0 or 1 almost surely, because this is a positive random variable, so all of those terms have to be positive. So either mod Zn goes to 0 or mod of 1 minus Zn goes to 0, which implies Zn goes to 1. So now we actually have proven the result that Zn converges to either 0 or 1 almost surely. Now when Z infinity is equal to 0 or 1, recall from our first definitions page, we have that I infinity is equal to 1 minus Z infinity. The above result is true whenever Z of W is 0 or 1. We also know that intuitively because when Z of W goes to 0, we know that I of W is perfect, or the capacity is really good. Since I of n is a martingale, we have expectation of I infinity is equal to I naught, which was I of W. We have this because of the Martingale property, that is, the expectation will not change throughout all iterations of the Martingale process, which immediately gives us P of I infinity equals 1 equal to I naught from the expectation itself, which is equal to I of W, and P of I infinity equal to 0 equals 1 minus I naught. And this proves our first theorem. A simple proof using Martingale techniques, but a very astounding result and very powerful result, which shows us how polar codes can actually achieve capacity. We now move to the second theorem of channel polarization, which gives us how fast ZW and I goes to 0. So the second theorem states that for any BDMC W and fixed rate R less than the capacity of the channel, there exists a sequence of sets AN where n is a power of 2 such that the size of this set AN is greater than n times R. Now we show that as n increases, we have at least nr indices for which Z of W n of I is less than order of magnitude of n power minus 5 by 4. Look at the proof again. We have the same setting as earlier, but Zn plus 1 is less than Zn squared for Bn equals 1. Now for Bn equals 0, we have Zn plus 1 is less than 2 of Zn minus Zn squared, but since Zn is always positive, we have it is lesser than 2 times Zn. If we define any two parameters zeta, where zeta is bounded between 2 and 0 and m greater than 0, and define t subscript m of zeta as a set such that Z of I is less than zeta for all I greater than m, then for the event Tm of zeta, we have Zi plus 1 divided by Zi is less than 2 if Bn is equal to 0 and is equal to zeta if Bn is equal to 1 from these results. Now we just multiply this n times, and because for all Zi less than m, where I is lesser than m, we have all of them being less than 1. So the product of them is also going to be less than 1. So Zn lesser than zeta times 2 power n minus 1 and product of zeta by 2 power Bi from this repeated multiplication. We have zeta times 2 power n minus m, zeta by 2 power the summation of the bits Bi. Now we define another event with parameters n, m greater than 0 and eta, the parameter eta, u, mn of eta, such that the summation of Bi from m plus 1 to n is greater than half minus eta times n minus m. Then for the event Tm zeta intersection um eta, we have this to hold true for Zn from the previous inequality. And now we substitute eta naught and zeta naught to 1 by 20 and 2 power minus 4 respectively to get Z of n to be lesser than 2 power minus 4 minus 5 n minus m by 4. Now all we need to show that is that Tm zeta naught intersection um n eta naught occurs with high probability. That is, we need to show that this is true with high probability, and then we actually get the order of magnitude bound of this form, because 2 power n is actually capital N. First we look at Tm of zeta naught. As seen from theorem 1, P of Z infinity equal to 0 is I naught. If you define an event where Zn is less than zeta naught, then Z infinity equal to 0 is actually a subset of the union over all n greater than m Sn for large enough m. Because it is converging, we should have for some m where all Zn's are lesser than any real number, and here especially zeta naught. So this has to be true. Hence we have the probability of union of n greater than m Sn to be greater than I naught minus delta by 2, where delta by 2 is the error term. From the definition of Tm naught, we have that it is actually equal to union of n greater than m naught Sn. And from the continuity probability, we have the probability of Tm naught of zeta naught is equal to the probability of union of n greater than m naught Sn. And this is greater than I naught minus delta by 2. And m naught is some function of zeta naught and delta. Now looking at the set u m n of eta naught, we can use Chernoff bound to actually bound the probability of the summation to be lesser than half minus eta naught times n minus m. And we find that the probability of u complement is lesser than 2 power minus n minus m times 1 minus h of half minus eta naught, where h is the binary entropy function. Now we have these two results. Probability of t complement is less than 1 minus I naught plus delta by 2, and probability of u complement is less than 2 power minus n minus m times 1 minus the entropy of half minus eta naught. We can choose m to be equal to m naught. We already have fixed eta naught. Now we have freedom over the variable n, and we can choose it to be anything such that this upper bound is at least delta by 2. And then using union bound, we have the probability of t complement union probability of u complement is lesser than 1 minus I naught plus delta. Hence, probability of the intersection of these two events being greater than I naught minus delta. Therefore, the inequality we started with, we can group all these constants into C and write this inequality as Zn lesser than C times 2 power minus phi n by 4 for all n greater than n naught. We have the probability of this event to be greater than I naught minus delta. Now, if we define another set Vn where Zn is lesser than C 2 power minus phi n by 4, we immediately see that Vn contains the set T of m naught zeta naught intersection U of m naught n naught. Hence, P of Vn is greater than I minus delta. And we set this I minus delta to R because R is lesser than I of W. Now, if you notice, the probability V of n is equal to the summation over all B0 to Bn 1 by 2 power n, which is the probability of any one of all the possible B0 to Bn occurring, times the indicator that Zn is less than any constant times 2 power minus phi n by 4. Now, if you take the summation over all these indicator variables, you'll actually get the size of An. But we know that this probability is greater than R. Hence, we can write An is greater than Nr and Z of Wn of I is lesser than order of magnitude of n power minus phi by 4 for all I in An. And that's our proof for theorem 2. So the theorem is as follows. We have that the event of error occurring is upper bounded by n power minus 1 by 4 where n is a power of 2. We use the successive cancellation decoder as above, and the error event is defined as the estimate of UA not being equal to actual transmitted UA. Remember that UA is the message vector. So if anything belongs to A complement, that is known at both the receiver and transmitter. Only for UA do we need to actually perform decoding. This is obviously only true for rates lesser than the capacity of the channel. So we begin the proof. We just define Bi to be the event where U hat of 1 to I minus 1 is equal to U1 to I minus 1, and only the ith bit is in error, right? So the error event, that is script E, will actually become the union of all I in A, the set A, of Bi. So what Bi assumes is that no error has occurred before the ith bit, and only at the ith bit do we have an error. But now we see that Bi can be rewritten in some other form. So we have Bi is equal to the set where U hat 1 to I minus 1 is equal to U of 1 to I minus 1, and the estimate is not equal. So that was h of I yn to n U hat of 1 to I minus 1 not equal to Ui as the decision maker here. But now since U hat 1 to I minus 1 is actually the true message, we have that this is a subset of replacing U hat of 1 to I minus 1 with the actual U1 to I minus 1 itself. Now this event is a subset of only the latter part happening, and we define this to be a subset of a set epsilon I, where we define epsilon I to be the set of all inputs un and outputs yn such that the decision is in error. So the wi y of 1 to n u1 to I minus 1 given ui is lesser than the inverted bit. Only when this is true, an error in the ith bit has actually occurred. So we clearly see that p of epsilon is lesser than p of union of I in A, epsilon I, which is lesser than summation of p of epsilon I from the union bound. We get the first inequality because epsilon is equal to union of Bi, and each Bi is actually a subset of epsilon I. Now we need an upper bound on p of Ei, and then if we take a summation, we will get an upper bound on the probability of error. So p of epsilon I can be written as summation over all un and yn, the joint probability of un and yn occurring together, and the indicator that u and yn belongs to the set epsilon I. Now clearly the probability of un, any one of un, is 1 by 2 power n, capital N, because that's the size of this vector and that's the number of bits we have, times the channel probability of yn given un. Channel probability here is w sub n. This channel is the effective channel seen after the encoding process, and the indicator remains. Now since we know that an error has occurred, then this indicator value is 1 only when u and yn is in epsilon I. We have that this square root value wn of I given the inverted bit was transmitted is going to be greater than 1, because if it was not greater than 1, there would have been no error actually. Hence we just manipulate the summation a little more, we do some massaging, and we then get the form of z of wn over here. So this is actually z of wn. So therefore we have probability of error, which is P of epsilon I, is lesser than the summation of Z of W and I. Now this is evidently lesser than the max of Z of W and I over all I and the size of A itself. Now the size of A is actually lesser than n because A is a subset of 1 to n. But we know the max from the previous theorem of Z of W and I is bounded by n power minus 5 by 4, and hence we have that the probability of error is upper bounded by order of n power minus 1 by 4. And we see that as n becomes very large, probability of error goes to 0. Conclusions. Polar codes can asymptotically be rate achieving codes for binary DMCs. For a block length of n equal to power n and transmission rate r, which is less than the capacity of the channel, we see that Z of W and I is approximately n power minus 5 by 4 for at least n times r channels. This gives us a rate at which the channels polarize, that is how large n needs to be for the Z parameter to go close to 0. We can get better bounds and tighter bounds than this. For a block length of n equal to n, we also have that the probability of error is approximately n power minus 1 by 4. This is a loose bound, and we can strengthen the upper bound to an exponential function of n actually. Also here the upper bound does not explicitly depend on the rate r. We can derive sharper bounds which can tell us how the error probability will degrade when the rate goes closer to 1. Now that we've concluded the presentation, thank you for listening and have a great day.